Lovely, very good evening. Once again, we are here to have an amazing learning session. Um, the title itself has intrigued me enough, and I'm very eagerly waiting. Don't believe your client. Okay, let me see what the session actually holds. I'm very excited about it. The session is being recorded. We'd love for all of you to be on video and unmute and speak throughout the session. However, if you choose to not be recorded, we respect your decision. The recording will be shared post the session. There are CCUs that will be awarded based on the duration you stay in the call. To ensure that the certificate is issued to you with the right name, may I request you to all check your name on Zoom, the way you would like it to be there on your certificate. Yeah. If there are names within brackets and you don't want those, remove those. If there are capitalization that needs to be fixed, please fix it. Middle names, last names, check all of it so that we don't have to reissue certificates in case it goes in the wrong name. With that, let me introduce our speaker for today, Carol. We've been in touch with Carol through one of our members, and Mandar got us on a call with Carol, and we are so happy to have her on. A little bit about Carol. She's the founder and owner of Puzzles to Purpose. Again, another name that is really catchy and got my attention, which is a coaching, mentoring, and training organization that works with businesses, executives, legal teams, groups, individuals, families, and in the areas of communication, interpersonal skills, intergenerational communication, workplace conflict, transitions, leadership, character development, goals, and work styles. I don't think Carol has any area untouched in all of this. She's an MCC with ICF. She's a trainer in several, well-known frameworks, laser focused coaching. She's an executive coach and trainer, 5 languages of appreciation at work, conversational intelligence, Tilt 365. I'm not sure what that is, but she's a trainer and facilitator for that. Enrich, emotionally healthy, spirituality, path, elements profile, 4 elements success, academic life coaching. So she's got lots of training and facilitation experience around the coaching areas. She's an active member of ICF. She is also active in ICF Philadelphia chapter. And with the American Coach Training Organization. She served on the board of National Association of Women Business Owners Delaware and served on the board of the Great Valley Toastmasters organization, and is a Women in Action mentor for the Women Leadership Council. With such a rich profile, I am eagerly waiting to listen to Carol. Carol, over to you to enlighten us.
Thank you, Shanti. And I'm exhausted already, so that was a bit much. I think the only place I have to go right now is to fall off my horse, which I'm hoping is not the case today. One of the things that I am delighted to find out about this group is that you don't like slide presentations, which is fantastic. I don't like slide presentations either. I love them where we have the opportunity to be together and really just talk about some of the things that we have struggles with coaching, and in particular, a couple of things that I brought for you today. First thing is the idea of laser-focused coaching. What comes to mind when you think of laser-focused coaching? Just jump in because I'm not going to be able to see everybody.
It's a name called Mercy comes to my mind.
I'm sorry, say that again, Johnny.
Mercy comes to my mind. I learned laser-focused coaching from her.
From Mercy, that's right. Yeah.
Get to the point.
Get to the point. Very true.
Stay with that point, whatever the contract be for the session or for the engagement.
Okay. And then also focus on the client, not the problem. Good.
Go deep into one topic rather than wide. So deeper exploration.
Okay. All right. So as Shanti brought to you a minute ago, I am one of the trainers for Marian Franklin's laser-focused coaching. And the idea of laser-focused coaching is really to get to the heart of the matter quickly and efficiently. Now, I want to make sure that I dispel the myth that that only applies to life coaching, because it really doesn't. It applies to all coaching. If someone comes into you, if you are an executive coach, and says, I have a time management problem, it's not a moment to take out a box of tissues and have a cry fest, but what it actually is that moment to find out, why has this person not solved this themselves? There's an underlying reason for that. And so that's where we want to start. We want to think about the fact that we're looking for underlying reasons why people are in the situations they're in, so that transformation happens in the process of a coaching session, which may also include transaction. I'm of the belief that transformation and transaction do not need to be two separate coaching sessions. Thinking, for example, with executives, you may have a period of time in your coaching session where you are working on the transformation of the person there, so that the transaction that they have come to might take some of the rest of the time of the coaching session. I don't believe that they are two separate things, but it's something for you to experiment with, and I'd like you to try to do that. When we think of that pithy little phrase that says, don't believe your client, what comes to your mind?
The problem is not the problem.
Okay.
Don't believe the first thing they say. I think that's what came to mind.
Okay.
There's more that meets the eye. So
There's more that meets the eye. Yeah.
The iceberg analogy came to my mind.
It does indeed, doesn't it? That iceberg analogy. So if we piggyback on that iceberg analogy, the story that your client comes with is just the tip of the iceberg. And if we stay with the tip of the iceberg, well, we all know what happened to the Titanic, right? If we stay with the tip of the iceberg, we're missing a great deal. So I'd like to give you 4 things that I'd like you to think about that are below the iceberg. And you might want to write these down. One is perspective. Clients come with perspective. 2 that we might be listening for are discrepancies. For example, they are saying one thing and doing something else, or they're saying 2 things that might be conflicting with one another. So the first was perspective. The second are discrepancies. The third, behavioral patterns. Something that you're noticing in the client that they continue to repeat, whether it's the way they say something or it's a behavioral pattern, something they're physically doing. And the 4th thing to be on the lookout for are emotions. Some clients are very demonstrative about that. Others maybe not so much. So perspective, discrepancies, behavioral patterns, and emotions. Now, we as human beings have a tendency to start to rank those things. They are not numbered 1 through 4. You may find them in any sort of order. You may find several things going on at one time. But are we really listening beneath the words? So much of our lives involves around what we can see. And Shanti and I were talking about this just before everyone got on, about the fact that coaching now has become very international, but it's also very much Zoom. Take stock for a minute of yourself. How much do you rely on seeing your client to inform the type of questions you're asking? What happens if you're to turn off your screen and really listen to what's being said and not being said for your client? Are we questioning meaning? Are we questioning throwaway comments? Are we questioning patterns? And most importantly, are we avoiding conclusions? You as coaches need to be experts of not knowing. Boy, that feels really counterintuitive, doesn't it? You are an expert of not knowing. What comes up for you thus far with what's been said?
We have something in the East which says we moved from mindfulness to no mind when you're coaching.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're moving to no mind, which is, and it's a very interesting thing to do with as coaches because we naturally evaluate, but evaluation moves to conclusions and then it moves into judgment if we're not careful. So we want to think about the fact that we are really releasing all of that. Yeah, that 80-20 principle. So there are a couple of ways. Go ahead.
I was going to say that get comfortable with the space of not knowing and resist that tendency to label, because we tend to label with something which is familiar and which may have happened in our own experience, or we may have experienced recently with another client. And then we are quick to draw those connections. And therefore, actually, there is that desire to get to something familiar.
Yes, very true. And well said. Thank you for that. Absolutely. You know, and it's interesting, Michael, I appreciate that. Observe with curiosity. And yet at times I think about that and I'm wondering if anyone else has had this experience where that just seems like such an unattainable goal. And maybe part of it is that I would like to see some practical ways to have that happen. What is curiosity? What are we actually doing in those moments? It feels very large. So I'm going to give you a couple of ways to think about questioning. I'm going to give you a little tiny story. It's very, very short. And I would like you to pay attention to just the facts. Just the facts. Will, 25, tells his coach that he has tried out for a football team for the last 3 years. He says that all of his life he's wanted to be a football player, and no matter how close he gets, he's continually rejected. He goes on to say that although he is in the best shape and can run faster than most of the other players, most of the coaches don't like him. He says they feel a little threatened by him. Okay. That's your client's story. What are the only facts in this story?
That he's 25 years old and his name is Will.
Okay, so we have Will, and Will is 25.
He is a football player and he is trying from last 3 years.
3 years, yes, 3 years.
Okay, we had several people there at that moment. Let's see.
I'm saying he's a football player and he's trying for last 3 years.
Okay, so he's a football player and he's tried for the last 3 years.
And he's rejected.
And he, okay, let's see if we can redefine rejected. What's the actual fact?
The reasons could be different, his assumptions could be different, wrong, but he is getting rejected is a fact.
He is not being selected.
He's not being selected.
There we go. Yeah. There we go. He has not made the team. Isn't that amazing? And think about the difference, the dramatic difference between he's being rejected and he did not make the team. So just the facts are far simpler than all of the story. So one of the things that we can do for ourselves as coaches is think about what are the actual facts here. But believe it or not, that's a tool that we can also use with our clients. If I were to say to you, what are the facts in the story that you just told me? You'd be surprised what happens for clients when they actually discover that the number of facts in a story most of the time can be counted on one hand. There are very few facts. The majority of it is story. And when we question the story, the ability to question the story, it helps our clients see things from potentially another angle, not necessarily a perspective, but potentially another angle. What's coming to mind with this?
Can you get clarity on the difference between perspective and angle?
Perspective is something that, so let's think of perspective. I'll give you a metaphor to describe perspective. You'll find that I love metaphors and maybe they help. If you think of yourself as you have thoughts and you have a conveyor belt imagine that you have a conveyor belt that runs up and down through your body. You have thoughts, you have emotions, and you have gut feelings that drop into this conveyor belt as though it's going up and down. I'd like you to think of that conveyor belt as bias. You all have bias. And in addition to that, that conveyor belt is in the dark because it's inside of you. It has no additional light to shine on it. So to answer your question, the angle would be the least bit of light that comes out as you speak those words. It's not the idea of changing everything that's on that conveyor belt. It's just what's come out to start. What does that do for your idea, your thought process between angle and perspective?
Are you asking me?
Mm-hmm. Yes, please. Thanks, Rick.
Well, yeah, I think, yes, I think that's a little bit different than, it seems like the angle might be more immediate or assumptions or my experiences, and just like you said, my biases versus the perspective might have no attachment. It's more concrete, intentional, and it just seems naturally it came up, whereas that angle might be something that I'm owning.
It's also thinking a little bit of the crack in the door to allow your client to think of something different or experience something different. You're not trying to change perspective. You're simply evoking new awareness by either the comments that you're making or the questions that you're asking for new awareness. That's all that is just new awareness you're noticing.
That makes sense. Thank you.
That's helpful, Rick. That's a great question. Thank you. Shanti, I am not able to see all of the chat because there's lots of
I
it,
will
so
relay
please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, there was one question by Pradeep, very similar on the lines you were just discussing. Relation between context and perspective.
Okay, so context really would be what the story is wrapped in, context. Whereas perspective is the meaning that the client is making out of that story. Does that make sense? There's a difference between the context of a story, in other words, how the story is housed, and the meaning that a client is making out of it. And we're questioning the meaning of what the client is making.
Yeah, seems it is clarified for Pradeep. We're good.
Yeah. All right, so the first way that we were just talking about is actually getting just the fact. For a client, just observing the facts can be very enlightening. Oh my, I'm making more meaning of this. For example, the conversation about rejecting is a word that's making meaning as opposed to the facts. Another story, which it highlights accepting the client's perspective the way it is. Stan has been discussing his job frustrations for quite some time. He began his conversation by saying, "Unless I deal with my work life, I don't think it makes sense to discuss my personal challenges." What is that client's perspective?
Still unknown and need to be uncovered.
Say that one more time for me, please.
Still unknown and needs to be uncovered.
Okay.
And
That
if
perspective.
I'm in that space as a coach, I will say, okay, so
So, are you going to continue on with that, Johnny?
I'll pause.
Okay.
And
What else?
the thing that comes to my mind is that the client is making an assumption that work and personal life are divorced. They're not connected in any way.
Indeed. And is that really true for all of us, for any of us, actually? No, we cannot separate. What we do in one place is something we do everywhere. May look a little different, but we still have behavioral patterns that we need to address. So a second way is just accepting the client's perspective as is. That's something we don't want to do. We want to question it. We want to be respectfully skeptical. What has you believing that to work on your personal issues or personal challenges is irrelevant to your work challenges? What comes to mind when you hear that?
It's judgmental and it's your own perspective.
Right.
Would it be fair to ask the client what they would like to discuss first and let it be a choice? Something that if they're comfortable only talking about work, or even if, to start with, and just let it flow, because if they do decide to talk about anything, and let it be a flow of a conversation rather than sharing as to asking and interfering with their thought process right in the beginning, right then. Just curious about that.
And I do believe that that conversation would continue that way, but I think one of the things we want to be very careful to do with our clients is to not follow them to the degree that we are accepting everything that they've said. It is our job to be an external disruptor. If you think about a bicycle and a bicycle going down the road, if you put a stick in between those bicycle spokes, the bicycle has to stop. That is our job. Our job as coaches is to be external disruptors because we believe what we're saying until it's challenged. And it's important for us as coaches to make sure that we are respectfully challenging our clients simply to look at their situation more carefully. Doesn't mean we're trying to change their mind. We're not trying to change their perspective. We're not trying to do any of those things. We are trying to simply give them the opportunity to take a closer look at what they said.
Got it.
Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and we're going to do some practicing of this too in a little bit as well, which will help us, I think. Yeah.
But there is a risk of them feeling judged, Carol, when you do that, and you have to watch out for that.
Well, I would not say so if we're careful. So part of what we're going to talk about in a little bit is the idea of the art of direct communication. And the most important thing about direct communication is that we don't dilute the message, but we are extremely careful about how the message is delivered. So don't dilute the message, but do soften the language that you use. And those are some things that we're going to practice in a little bit.
Thank you.
Yes, but it's absolutely true. We have to be careful as coaches to not shy away from direct communication. And I don't want to present direct communication in a very American way of doing it, because I don't believe that that's accurate or wise. But we are doing our clients a disservice if we are not noticing things, patterns, behaviors, perspectives, assumptions, emotions. If we're not noticing these things, our clients aren't noticing them either. It is our job to notice and then just offer it to the client for what their consideration. Nothing more than that. It is not our job to drive conclusions. It is not our job to change perspectives. It is our job to simply offer to the client what we are noticing. And I know that all of you have this same issue personally as well. You don't remember everything you've said. You don't even know how you come across. That's the beauty of having a coach, is just the different perspective that's coming back to you. It makes you think. These are great questions.
Can you give an example on the direct communication?
I will when we get to it, I promise.
Sure. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so let's think of the last thing that I would like to share with you, and this is the helicopter view. So what I would like for you to think about is the fact that you as a coach want to have a helicopter view of what's going on with the client. You don't want to land that helicopter smack in the middle of the story and get involved in the story details and please tell me more and explain all that. You really want to stay up in the helicopter to have a more overarching view of what's going on. But the second piece of that is, I'd like you to learn to encourage your clients to also have the helicopter view of what's going on in their lives. Imagine if you were on a street corner and an accident happened between a couple of cars in front of you. If you were on one street corner and your friend was on the opposite street corner, do you think that you would have seen the accident the same way? Not at all.
No, yeah.
Yeah, not at all. You know, one of you might have said that you saw a red car hit a white car. Another one might have said it was a silver car hitting another. It could be any number of things. It could be the number of people involved in the accident. It could be whose fault. But we don't know when we are down at the level of the story. When we are up in the helicopter, being very curious, then we are not involved in the details of the story. So when a client brings a problem to you, you want to stay away from asking them details about the story. And one of the ways that that typically happens to us as coaches is we try to remember what's going on in the story. Sometimes we have been taught early on in coaching that we're supposed to remember all words that clients use. My goodness, is that not an insurmountable task? Sometimes we are taught that we are supposed to repeat everything we've heard from a client's story. That's also an insurmountable task. I don't know about you, but my memory is not that good to come up with absolutely everything a client said if they went on for a solid 2 minutes, giving me every single detail, thinking that I needed all of that. So we want to be listening for those three things, those four things that I gave you earlier: perspective, discrepancies, things that don't quite go together, behavioral patterns, and emotions. It could be any one or a couple of those things. So before we move on to direct communication, I'd like to practice a little bit of this. So I'm going to allow you to write something down if you'd like. Under normal circumstances, when we coach, I am one of those people who is very much opposed to writing things down, simply because it removes us from being fully present in the moment. but I want you to practice something right now. I want you to practice your gut intuition. What did you hear from this client? I don't want it formulated like some sort of lovely coaching question. I want you to learn to trust your gut in what you think happened. And you will notice when we talk about this in a minute that not everybody's going to hear the same thing, and that's perfectly fine. Are we ready? I am struggling with an issue, making a decision about going back to work after my leave of absence for illness. I'm worried that I might not be ready to go to work, but I'm really tired of being home alone and away from my colleagues. They need me. My boss calls me all the time to ask about things. I'm supposed to go back in 2 weeks, and I should be getting ready for that right now, but I keep procrastinating.
I hear anxiety, Carol.
Okay, you hear some anxiety.
Fear of
fear.
going back to work.
Okay, did I hear somebody say fear of going back to work? Okay,
Yep.
so there's some fear going on, all right.
He's unclear whether he's fully recovered from his illness or not. That may be one of the reasons of the procrastination.
I think mentally
Okay.
not prepared to resume. Still not feeling ready to resume, but yet is considering because of lot of other things.
Well, we don't know all that yet, but yeah, okay, so some feelings, all right.
Decision making. Difficulty in decision making.
Okay. What
The
else?
need to be needed.
The need to be needed. Okay. Wow.
Dilemma.
Seems to be very troubled.
Okay.
Is staying at home is giving him something more than what his presence can for now, and that's
okay. Now let's think about that for just a minute. Where have we gone with that one? We've made an assumption. Yeah. So let's back it up a little bit to what are you hearing?
Maybe fear of losing.
Fear and the anxiety, which flipped it.
So leave it fear and anxiety. Yeah. So do we see that was thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate it because it really helped all of us to see that if we go beyond questioning the curiosity of what might be the fear and anxiety, or I noticed there feels maybe a bit of fear or anxiety here in this discussion. What happens for you when I say that? Now, that hopefully is an example not only of direct communication, but the delivery was so very softened. But notice what happens when we move from fear and anxiety to assuming we know why it's happening. See the difference? Yeah. And we as coaches, we as human beings have a tendency to do that. We move it from what we're noticing to diagnosing it at the same time. What else are we coming up? What else is coming up? Ramesh, I think you had one.
Yeah, Carol, I'm a little bit confused because when you say fear and anxiety, unless you said it earlier, even that is an interpretation. I see that there is actually a discrepancy. There's a conflict. There's a dilemma, as someone said. Huge kind of discrepancy in his story. One part of him wants to go to work. He feels wanted. And the other part of him is not yet ready. So what's causing that discrepancy needs to be probably
okay, but
discussed.
And that is perfectly fine, and that is your intuition, which is great. That is your intuition, and that might be exactly the way that you run with it. But Hamani, is it Hamani? Just want to make sure I pronounce it correctly. Her intuition was some fear and anxiety. So there's really no reason why she can't ask that, because that is her intuition. She's simply lying up there in the helicopter saying, oh, it sounds as though these emotions might be going on. Either way, you're going to offer it to the client and allow the client to respond with how they heard. The value, Ramesh, is that you provide intuition and a different perspective than what your client holds. So if we hold back and don't give our client that intuition, we are taking things away from our client. But your intuition is not going to be the same as someone else's. Now, if we went the step further that Hamani and I worked on a minute ago and made an assumption out of what she noticed, then we would be incorrect. But just offering it as, I'm noticing this, you noticed a discrepancy, Hamani noticed some anxiety.
Sure.
How's that land for you?
Good. There can be intuition can be different for different coaches. Absolutely.
It absolutely is. And that is the value, because remember, all you're doing is cracking that door open a little bit to allow your client to contemplate what you've had to say. You're not trying to change their perspective. You're not trying to understand their story. They're the ones that need to understand it. You are simply trying to put a crack in the door to allow them to contemplate an additional thought. Yeah.
So Carol,
go ahead.
You're still bringing in your perspective. You can't help not doing that.
That's correct.
It's a different perspective, but it is a perspective.
Yeah. Absolutely. And your perspective's important. Yeah, go ahead, Raja.
Sorry to interrupt, Carol.
No, not at all.
So it's like a two-parts question. So the first part would be, do we always ask and trust our intuition and gut and always ask, because there is no harm in asking, like I noticed this, I noticed that? Or is there a rule of when do we do it? And the second part is, like, when we're noticing something, we start thinking about it and trying to formulate the question. So we might lose the attention, like in what, and we're not actively listening anymore. So how do we balance that?
Very good questions, Raja. So yes, to the first part of the question, which is we do want to notice all the time, because if we don't, our questions, that's going to hang around, and our questions are going to be laced with what we didn't ask. So we want to make sure that we ask what comes to our mind. Now, the second practical step that you just brought up is the fact that there's an assumption going on in your mind that you need to be formulating this question when you notice something. My suggestion, and something I would love for you to all experiment with, is the pause. P-A-U-S-E, the pause. What I would want you to experiment with is saying absolutely nothing immediately after a client is speaking, for two purposes. One, to allow your client to finish thinking, and two, for you to have a few seconds to formulate the question that comes to your mind. So, Raja, in order to give you that very step-by-step, you're noticing things, and you will notice things as the client is speaking, but don't stop your brain to think, I've got to figure out what the question is right then. Let the client finish speaking. You do some time to think, let them think, and then ask your question. I'm going to demonstrate that in a little bit. Raja, where does that leave you in terms of your questions?
Yeah, thank you. It actually needs a little bit of practice, because we're always sometimes stuck in our heads. So yeah, it's something I really would like to practice and do the posing. Can I ask you another question?
You may indeed.
Thank you. So I'm now experimenting or trying to learn more about, like they tell you the gut feeling, whatever is in your heart and in your mind. But sometimes it's when you're in a situation or when you're in a dilemma, and this can be true to me as a coach or my client, how do we differentiate if it's the thought in my head or if it's my gut feeling or if it's my heart? Sometimes it's not very easy to distinguish so that you can make the right decision.
Okay, so there's two separate thought patterns there, Raj, I believe. One is, how do you do that yourself? And that, of course, for yourself takes time thinking about it. I like to go through, what assumptions am I making? What beliefs do I have? What perspectives come out of those assumptions and beliefs? And what actions am I taking as a result of that? So I'll go over that for you one more time. What assumptions am I making? What beliefs do I hold? What perspectives are coming out of those two? And what actions am I taking? So Raja, that answers your portion of the question. It's a suggestion of how do I do that for myself. The part about how we do that for a client is we don't. We allow our clients to think through some of those things themselves. We can ask questions such as, what, if any, assumptions might you be making in this situation? What beliefs do you hold that might be affecting your perspective? How's that landing for you, Raja?
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so we've got lots of questions up here.
Actually, I would like to reflect to the case that you shared. I just noted through my intuition that the client has the resistance, the state of resistance, and also behavioral patterns as to focus through our own perspective to others, not on focusing on yourself, but on others, and also that everyone waits something from the client.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So lots of rich insight, and you could pick any one of those and ask a question about it, which we'll do in a minute. Okay, some more questions. Looks like Shankar.
Yeah. Hi, Carol. Yeah, hi, Carol. First of all, real privilege to listen to somebody who's coached by the famous Marion Franklin. So my question is, as somebody to whom challenging doesn't come naturally, and yet who knows challenging the coachee or the client or the thinker is important, what can I do to be more comfortable with challenging or disrupting the coachee?
Maybe what might be a bit of a hurdle for you in that space would be the idea of challenging. Challenging is a word that comes with some heaviness, as opposed to contemplating the idea of questioning as though I am an expert of not knowing what's happening for you in this space, as opposed to challenging them in their thinking, wondering what that's doing for you mindset-wise.
So basically moving from thinking of it as challenging, not challenging, but questioning in a curious way is what I'm hearing, Carol.
And how is it landing for you?
Definitely more comfortable than challenging.
There's a place for challenging, but I will say in the couple of decades that I've been coaching, challenging is used, I don't know if I would say rarely, but not very often. Let me put it that way. I will use challenging for maybe an executive client who is potentially continuing to do the same thing over and over again. And I'm noticing the pattern and challenging that. But that's different than questioning what a client is believing, what perspective they're holding, where's it coming from, what about it is useful, what about it is not useful. When I have clients that have perspectives that are tightly held, which of course is just about everybody, one of the questions I ask continuously is, what about this perspective is helping you? What's fascinating is that most people are able to enumerate what isn't helpful. But if they're able to look at what's helpful, then they'll realize that, well, there might be parts of this that are useful to me. There's a reason why I'm not letting it go. And that also often highlights the parts of it that are not useful. How much of it do I want to save? How much of it do I want to get rid of? But if we look at a perspective as a big fat whole, then we have a tendency to want to get rid of it, as opposed to thinking, wait a minute, there are aspects of this that really do help me. Where's that leaving you?
With a lot to think about my attitude to challenging and what I need to do about that.
Yeah. And I think one thing else that I would like for you to hear is that your perspective, your intuition is valuable to your client. Doesn't mean you're right, but your intuition and your perspective is valuable to your client simply because it's different than theirs. Not because you're right necessarily, but because it's different. And that gives them the opportunity to look at their situation in its parts, not the whole, but in its parts, so that they're able to take it apart and say, oh, all right, what about this do I want to keep? What about this do I want to do differently? Much more empowering place. But if you are withholding your intuition from your client, you are doing them a disservice. They need your intuition. I love that.
Thank you, Hira.
And then it sort of shrinks challenging down to its appropriate size, doesn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Ramesh, I think you were next, right?
Yes, Carol. So relates to what you just said. If there was a fork in the road where you have a choice of giving your intuition, or when you sense that the client has said something which doesn't, two opposite things, like I want to go back to, I mean, people want me to come back to office, but I'm not so sure. That kind of a contradictory kind of a situation. The choice that I see for me as a coach is to, one, give my intuition, offer my intuition on the spot, which has the danger of taking the client along a certain direction which you are setting, or to ask him further question. Just say that I'm noticing this, what do you have to say? Instead of saying, I sense fear and anxiety. So
what is your question?
Ask him. My question is, so there is a choice to be made in terms of asking the client, just pointing out the discrepancy and asking him to process further. And the other thing is to give your intuition and asking him to respond or react to that. So clearly these two can take the conversation in two different directions. So,
Okay,
so what is more, so sorry, please go ahead.
No, that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to ask you, Ramesh, what you're noticing about your decision, your choice here to make this an either or response.
It's not an either or. I'm just saying that I've experienced these kind of, having to take, which route the conversation will take. And many times I found that by giving my intuition or observation a little too early in the conversation, the client is going in a certain direction. Whereas if I ask him or her to process further what they are saying or whatever is the discrepancy, then they come up with additional insights of their own. So the question really is, do you go with their insights or do you give your own thought and the conversation could go into a different direction? And you may never be able to come back to the fork in the road, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm not saying either this is better or that is better, but this is just coming up.
That's fine. So I think what I am saying to experiment with is the idea that in this, let's just say this particular story that we were just working through, making an observation about the perspective or the behavior pattern or the emotions or the discrepancies that come up, we want that to be open so that the client can respond to what is going on, as you said, Ramesh, with additional insights of their own, as opposed to, I'm not sure that I see that as a fork in the road. It may be, but I'm not sure that I see it as a fork in the road. I see it a bit more as in, I'm noticing whatever's happening for you in this space. What are you noticing when I say that? Let me see if that's any more confusing. I'm trying not to be confusing.
No, I'm okay with that. So it's just an observation. So you're saying it is not final. You can, kind of, he has to process the coach's intuition, and that could open up a productive conversation by itself. That's possible.
Indeed. Go ahead.
On the other hand, if the person has not explained the discrepancy fully, I'm just wondering what's the right stage? If I don't allow him to if I don't confront him with the discrepancy, so then I haven't, as a coach, got the full information to make a valid intuition. That's my worry.
See, Carol, if I may respond, I think we should present the strands of thought that we observe coming out from the client and invite the client to explore that I'm hearing these two strands of thought coming from you. One where, it expresses your keenness to get back to work, and the other where you are in a state of procrastination. So let me invite you to explore this thought and what's coming through you as you are speaking on these two issues.
Okay. Ramesh, where does that lead? Go ahead.
Which actually, we are just mirroring the whole thing rather than placing any perspective or any intuition in front of the client, so that we get the complete client's view on it.
Yeah, that's absolutely, that's fair. That's fair.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Looks like we have 2 more questions. Thanks for bringing up, Ramesh. That was helpful.
Carol, are we okay taking up these questions?
Yes, please do.
Perfect. Go ahead. Murthy, then Naz.
Thank you. Thank you. Carol, I was just thinking, I was just, going around that challenge around that word challenge. And I was saying that the thought that came to me is that challenge is a word and an action that has an energy to it that could be read wrong. So what I'm hearing one say is that instead of challenging, maybe we should be observing and asking and leaving it at that. For instance, when we were talking about that case that you brought up, what if I just say, as I listen to you, I'm sensing a conflict of some kind that's raging. Do you sense that too?
Or better yet, what do you sense when I say that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's so powerful. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's absolutely true. The only thing that I would add to what you just said so beautifully is that there is a place for challenge, but this isn't it.
This isn't it. Correct. You're
yes.
Right.
Yes.
And you talked about the place for challenge. When you see it as a pattern, it's probably an occasion where challenge becomes more appropriate.
Indeed. And it also would not be appropriate timing-wise to immediately follow the first story that a client gave us. You would not ever want to start off by challenging. But if they continue to hold on to the perspective or the behavior pattern throughout the session or even subsequent sessions, there might be a place for challenge.
And I'm guessing that the heart and gut will tell you if you just listen to that.
Indeed.
And it will tell you what would be the right time to challenge to.
Absolutely.
And it's
Absolutely.
the head that gets conflicted, not the heart and the gut.
Yes, indeed. And an interesting thing to make note of as well, particularly because in coaching programs, it's often taught that you have to have just the right question. I'm not at all a believer in that. You need it. What's more important is the timing of your question, which has everything to do with, am I being fully present with this person? So I know when is the appropriate time to ask a certain question. But yeah, that's great. Go ahead, Naz. I know you were waiting.
It takes off from what you just said. Maybe you were being intuitive, which is as follows, which is sometimes in different modalities like drama therapy and psychodrama, you make the client an offer. You say what they were seeing as semantics, I think was there when you say challenging versus, I'm just asking you a question. So we make an offer that is it perhaps there is some anxiety. You make an offer and the client can accept it or reject it. And that's the way we go forward. And that's what I hear you saying. So, you don't
Absolutely.
have to be right. The client can always say, no, it's not fear. Whether they're right or wrong, it's their choice, no problem. So that's where I see it. So you can't be too wrong. You just go with the intuition. You could be wrong with your intuition. So that's also fine.
Naz, I think I'm going to tweak that just a smidge, which may also seem a little counterintuitive, but quite frankly, as coaches, we're never right. And that's exactly where we need to be. If we are worried about being right or wrong, then we have lost the opportunity to allow our clients to just evoke new awareness. Everything that we question needs to be an offering. Everything. We need to offer it to our client for their consideration, which is why, in practical terms, when you offer your intuition, you must immediately follow it with a question. What are you hearing when I say that? What happens for you when I say that? What comes up for you when I say that? Or any number of questions like that. Never bring out intuition without following it, pairing it immediately with an offering question for your client. And when I teach this, I often tell them, here's your rule of thumb. Don't breathe between your offering and the question, because I don't want any space in there. I want you to be able to say, Naz, that was really a very interesting perspective that you just gave me. What happens for you when I say that out loud? Just like that. So that you have the ability to allow your client to see this as an offering. I would like for you to be able to lay it out there on the table And then your client has the opportunity to look at it. Again, with more of that helicopter view, I'm now observing my patterns of behavior, or I'm observing my perspective, or I'm observing my assumptions. I'm not so tightly tied to them that I feel like I need to defend myself. This is an observation. Beautifully said, Ness. Thank you for that. And Sarah, I think it looks like you're going to jump in as well.
Thank you so much, Carol. I was wondering and would like to hear from your experience, what kind of patterns of behavior could be there in this example?
Oh my goodness gracious. Well, there could be patterns of behavior in all sorts. So I'm going to give you a whole handful of them. One of them is something that we talked about with Ramesh a minute ago, which is all or nothing thinking. That's a pattern of behavior. Black and white thinking. Carrying old messages forward. We've all done that. We have to remember that. Sometimes we're stuck in a strategy. Sometimes we take it personally. Sometimes we have unmet needs. Sometimes there are boundary issues. Sometimes we are looking for someone to give us permission. Unmet expectations. Wanting things to be different than they actually are. And we could go on and on and on. There are typically about 20, 25 behavioral patterns that people fall into, but there are a handful of them that are very common. Unmet expectations, black and white thinking, all or nothing, expecting things to be what they are and they're not. Sometimes a bit of authority victim, but we all fall into those types of behavioral patterns. And Sarah, oftentimes a client story will have more than one, not necessarily one. Again, so it's not our job to sit there and diagnose during the story and think, okay, what am I hearing here? We as human beings have a tendency to repeat ourselves, repeat our patterns. Even if our story goes on, we have a tendency to lace our story with additional patterns. So please don't feel like you need to diagnose. You'll find, so you noticed with Ramesh, I asked him a question about that all or nothing. And the reason that it was the clue is because Ramesh said several times it's either this or that. That's a big clue that there's some all or nothing thinking going on. And you could just ask about it. What's happening for you in that spot? A question with either or thinking oftentimes is what else is possible. Does that help, Sarah?
Absolutely, thank you.
You're most welcome. Okay, I think we've got one more.
Go ahead, Piyush.
Okay, so it's more an observation than question. It looks like the need is to nudge the client to change their perspective versus come to mind. Nudge them to encourage them to shift in their perspective. And that could happen by offering mine, not compulsively, but just as an offer and being curious.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. Are you asking me if it is a goal for us as coaches to help our clients shift perspective?
I'm saying that's what we might end up doing. Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, it might end up doing. However, we want to be extremely careful that is not a direction that we are heading in. Sure. We simply want to open that offering for our client to consider it. They may reject it entirely, which is perfectly fine. One of the things that we want to watch as coaches is moving in the direction of shifting perspective with our clients. The reason that I say that is severalfold. One is we've made an assumption that the perspective needs to be moved, rather than allowing the client to determine that. And the other is that we oftentimes, and I have heard this so many times in recordings that I've reviewed, we feel that the perspective, that the client would be better off if the perspective were shifted. And that's heading in a direction. We are directing them. So we want to be very careful that we do nothing more. Again, keep that image in mind of you're only cracking the door open for them to consider what else is possible. And we must go into that questioning with, I don't have a clue as to how that's going to end up. I don't even have suggestions. I'm just going to leave it open for you. Yeah.
Sounds lovely. Thank you.
That's good questioning. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to a little bit of direct communication so that we can get to practicing it as well. What is your biggest fear with direct communication? Maybe you could put it in the chat and Shanti can read them to us. Yeah. What's your biggest fear with direct communication?
Might hurt the client.
Very true. The feel good factor. I love that. And we get
Leading the client, they would get upset. I may not come across as empathetic. Client may feel judged. Would it become a guidance or a leading the client? Break in trust, that I might have an agency from them. Trust may be lost. Being honest could be seen as brutal. Using the right words, oh my God, scrolling fast. So it doesn't sound like the direction or suggestion. Yeah, the client can feel challenged, getting to the client's side, being misunderstood, that it can be delivered softly.
Interesting. Okay, and that is not uncommon. I want you to all notice that all of those responses, marvelous as they are really directed at us as coaches. How we are perceived. Uh-oh. Yeah. It is very possible. I want you to think of direct communication in a different way. And I'm going to give you a couple of ways to try it. Think of direct communication as making an observation, connected back to what I said an hour ago, and then questioning it immediately. Because that makes you partnering with your client. You must make any observation partnered immediately. And I cannot express immediately too much. Immediately by a question. What comes up for you when I say that? What comes to mind when you hear that? What thoughts might you have as you contemplate that? All sorts of what questions. Simple observation. It's a simple observation, a simple intuition. And you as the coach must prepare yourself that you may not be correct. And that's the objective. It doesn't matter whether you're right or not. And I can promise you, after years of coaching, 99% of the time, I'm not right. That's great news. I mean, my goodness, other than being a weatherman, you don't get another profession that you can be paid to be wrong. Isn't it lovely? You don't need to be right or wrong. You are simply seeing something differently than I am. And that's great because it makes me think. It's doing competency number 7, evoking new awareness. Maybe just a small amount, could be huge. One of the almost foolproof ways of direct communication is to use metaphor. Now, before you panic about metaphor, I'd love for you to think about metaphor, and please don't use the word metaphor with your clients because you don't want people to suddenly panic as to whether they paid attention to grammar when they were in school. Metaphor is a word picture. So simply ask your client, if you were to paint a picture, what would this look like? What would the experience be? You as a coach can do the same thing. For example, if Shanti gave me a story and said that she was, her expectations were not being met, I might say to her, it sounds as though like someone who might be going to the hardware store for milk. What happens for you, Shanti, when I ask you that? Now, let me ask you, who thinks that that was a miserable piece of direct communication? Were you offended by that? Be honest.
Probably I'll just think about it. Did I really go to a very different kind of store? Was my expectation unreal? Probably I'll think about it, definitely not feeling offended.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
not offended.
Notice that there were a couple of pieces to that. One was that I didn't say you in that sentence to Shanti at all. I said it sounds as though someone might be going to the hardware store for milk. I used third person grammar so that Shanti had the opportunity to observe her life, observe her perspective. Notice how different it sounds, even if I in my voice, if I said, it sounds, Shanti, as though you are going to the hardware store for milk. Do you hear the difference in that?
Yeah.
That's some of the tone of direct communication that may feel a little bit frightening. So the first thing I do is I always take the word you out of any observation. Sounds as though someone, or it feels like there might be one foot in one canoe and one foot in another canoe. What might happen next? So that's the first tenet of direct communication. Take the you out of any observation that you're making. And the second thing is watch your tone of voice and your delivery. Now, that's going to be unique to each client. I happen to speak a certain way, which is usually partially because I also do counseling, is usually a little on the softer side. But if I had an executive client that was rather rapid fire and abrupt, I could change my tone of voice as well. The message is still nonetheless the same. It sounds as though you've got expectations in one direction that are not being met. What's coming up for you question-wise?
Carol, this is Lavana. I always saw metaphors as a form of indirect communication, actually. So it's a bit of a contradiction in my mind, the direct communication and metaphors. Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that. What it's actually doing is softening the delivery of the direct communication in two ways. One is we love to think in pictures. We as human beings just do that. And the second is we are removing the client's person from that emotional perspective space and giving them the opportunity to just look at it another way. So that'd be the use. Now, I would highly recommend that you not use metaphors every time you speak. And I would also highly recommend that if your client gives you a metaphor, don't let it go. Make sure that you're using it. So, for example, I had a client once that loved to hang glide. And so when he would tell me stories about the hang gliding, and I would ask questions about what was going on in a coaching session, sometimes I would ask him, what are you seeing now in this situation before you're about to take off with the hang gliding? So the visual of that gave him a better view of what all was taking place. So couple of rules of thumb with metaphors. Don't make them difficult. Word pictures. If your client thinks in pictures or starts to describe something in pictures, do not let it go. Hang on to that metaphor and use it as is appropriate in the session. And always use the word, don't use the word you in any kind of observation. Make it third person. Now that's work till you get the hang of it, which is part of what we're going to practice. So here's what I'd like you to do. Well, let me see if there's any other questions. Shanti, have you seen any other questions that we might want to address before we practice a little?
No, Herbert was just confirming. So what you're talking about a little bit earlier is it's separating the person from the situation. Yeah, no further questions.
All right, beautiful. Let's practice. So I'm going to let you do this again by writing it down. Make it easy. What I'd like you to do with this little story, and this one's very short as well, is I'd like you to write down your intuition. Now, let's not do this in complete sentences. Let's just write down a word or two that came to you intuition-wise. And from that, I would like you to craft your question, your observation and a question. So you're going to make an observation, and you're going to need to craft it on paper because unless we practice this regularly, we are not typically used to leaving the word you out of the observation. So you're going to have to take a few minutes and write that down on paper, followed immediately by a quick question. The question is less important right now than the observation you're making. The question is what comes up for you when I say that, or what are you hearing, or what happens, all of those things. What are you experiencing? Any of those. Let me check and see if anyone needs any further instruction on that. Okay, beautiful. Here's your story. Jason tells you he just got a new job offer after a few months of trying and is excited about the work. He also says he's putting a lot of pressure on himself to keep up with those who have worked at this company before, and he fears he will not succeed if others think he's failing. I would repeat it, but if I repeated it, that would not be the same as a coaching session. So, so let's see if we can do it without first. All right. So who's ready to give me an observation? Just pretend I'm Jason, the client. Give me an observation without the word you in it and follow it immediately with a question.
Can I go?
Yeah. Who's ready?
Carol, this is Michael here.
Okay, Michael.
The observations, there's a lot of emotions coming out, words, excited, fear, and pressure.
Okay, you sort of went in and out in terms of your microphone. Would you be so kind as to do that one more time for me?
You mean? Is it okay now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
The observation is very emotional. There's a lot of emotions coming out. Is excited, there's pressure and fear. That is
okay. Make it. So I'm the client now, Michael. Make an observation to me in third person, and then follow it immediately with a question.
So I'm observing a lot of emotions in what you've said. Let's start you in it.
Not as easy as it looks, is it?
So I'm observing a lot of emotions, what I heard. How could we describe the emotions being raised in the situation?
Okay. Now, one of the things that I'm going to encourage you to practice on that, Michael, is that we don't use the word how until we're almost at the end of the session in competency number 8, because how is either strategic or structural.
Okay.
So we want to always use what as our beginning question, all the way through to almost the end of a coaching session, because it keeps the conversation open. So if you say, I'm noticing some feelings of anxiety, is that what you were saying? Fear and anxiety? What comes up for you when I mention that? What are you noticing, Michael, about that? Are you thinking?
I kind of lost you there.
Oh, did you? Did
Yeah.
everybody else see? Okay. So we go back to, you said fear and anxiety.
Yeah.
I'm noticing possibly some emotions of fear and anxiety. What comes up for you when you hear that?
Still got a you in the question?
You in the question is fine, not in the observation.
Okay. So I think
I'll let you contemplate that for a minute.
Yeah.
Let's see, I'm not sure who's, Sarah, were you next? I'm not really sure.
Yes, thank you. I'm sensing success to be dependent on the judgment of others. What comes up when you hear this?
Okay, great, Sarah. One thing I would tweak a little bit is I'm sensing success might as opposed to is. Do you hear the
Great.
difference in judgment? Yeah.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
Shankar?
Yeah, if I heard it right, Sarah, my observation was, seems like taking the new job feels like bailing out. What, if anything, is true about that?
Possibly, yeah. That's a possibility. Johnny?
I'm noticing Jason is going through certain emotions. What might be coming up for him?
Okay. I'm noticing he might be going through certain emotions. We don't necessarily know. Yeah, good. That's softening the delivery. Yeah. Okay, who's next?
Svetlana?
Thank you. I noticed self-esteem of the client, doubts that he deserves the results. Maybe it's my assumption, but something like emotions in future that the client should work harder or bring more efforts to prove that he deserves.
Okay.
Otherwise, yes, just following what he's saying, that he doubts if he is not successful with what he's proposed, he would be considered by environment as a loser.
Okay, now that's a lot of diagnosing, moving further beyond just your initial intuition. Let's go back to your initial intuition and let's make an observation. So pretend I'm Jason. Let's make an observation to me about what you believe you heard without taking it all the way into
Then I would choose doubts in future.
Okay, go ahead. Actually make an observation to me in third person.
If someone doubts when he's at the finish that he did it.
And then the question?
And the question. How is in your perspective?
Okay, or what?
Oh, yes.
What?
Mhm.
Yeah, good.
What?
Okay. And notice that yours is, everyone has a different feel for it. Okay, Rick, I think you're next.
Yes, I would say what I'm hearing is a mix of excitement, but also some pressure. What's different now that you heard me say that?
Okay. And we can even soften, let's take that, Rick, your observation. Let's see if we can soften the observation even a little bit more. Maybe even I think I'm hearing, or what I might be hearing.
Mm.
Hear the difference as opposed to I'm hearing?
Even if I'm using their verbatim words that they said?
You're using their verbatim words, but you're also not sure what the meaning is to them. Remember, we all use words, but we don't, and a lot of times throwaway. We don't often fully embrace the meaning that we have delivered them with. So you just simply, and it's not bad, I'm just simply suggesting one of the things you might want to do to tweak that is, I believe I'm hearing.
Okay.
As opposed to I'm hearing. That's a possibility. Yeah. Again, depending on the person that you're talking to as well.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Who is
Smita?
next?
Yeah.
Okay, Smita.
It looks like someone is missing out enjoying the rain in the dark clouds. What does this bring up for you?
Aha, look at that. Even a metaphor in there as well. That's great. Yeah. Okay.
Mrinal?
So I would say I am sensing some emotions over here of worry of some kind. What makes you say so?
Okay. Or what's going on for you, or what are you experiencing? Yeah. Okay. All good.
Deepak?
Yeah, I am sensing that someone might be unappreciative of the work already put in. How are you sensing it?
Okay, let's take the how out. Make it a what?
What are you sensing?
Right. Notice the difference. Good, good. Okay.
Anuj?
I notice this moment is like the pulling back of the arrow on the bowstring before it is released. What comes up for you when you hear that?
Look at all these people showing off with their metaphors. That's fantastic.
Himani?
You know, and
Sorry,
what's
sorry.
sorry about that. What I was going to say about that, Anuj, was the fact that you could with that metaphor you can feel the tension, which is lovely. That's fantastic that you came with that. Yeah, go ahead, Imani. Sorry.
I'm noticing nothing succeeds like success. What are your thoughts?
Okay, what came to you, Imani, with the intuition you had?
But the intuition was the fear of failure.
Okay, so let's take your fear of failure as your springboard, and let's make a different observation about that.
Mm-hmm. Then it could be I notice a fear of falling down, or falling down. What are your thoughts on that? Something to that effect.
Okay, or failure. So I'm noticing what might be a fear of failure. What happens when you hear that? Does that make sense? Did you notice, Imani, that there's a big difference between actually using your intuition as your springboard, which was this fear of failure, lovely, versus nothing succeeds like success? Do you see how calling out your intuition of what feels like fear of failure will actually get the client to contemplate what they're actually experiencing? The statement about nothing succeeds like success doesn't reach the person that's sitting in front of you. What happens for you when you hear that, Hannah? Imani?
I do get it because it is not as direct as, about, failure. But the part where success came to me was putting it as a reframe to be able to say that ultimately this person gets his validation by, but the fear is a failure, right? It is about failure, and but I get your point that at this stage it's about, this would be the part to kind of observe and offer.
Yes, and you want to make sure that you're not in the mode of responding to your client's story by trying to change their perspective and direction. Yes. Good awareness. Okay, who's next?
Khalid, then that might be the last statement. Go ahead, Khalid.
Hi, Carol.
Hi
This
there.
is Khalid from Saudi Arabia. I would say I'm sensing there's a feel of fear. What might be the source of this fear?
Okay. Okay. You could say that, and or what might you be experiencing? Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Yep, nice.
Good. All right, let's try another one. This one's very short, so we'll see what happens because you're not going to get a lot of data on this one. Just pretend I'm the client. Lately, I've been all over the place, and I don't feel like I'm doing anything well. I need to get on track and get more focused.
Carol, I would say it sounds like that's someone else's goal. What do you feel about that?
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like it might be someone else's goal. Okay. Who else? What could we use? Renal?
Yeah, I sense the feeling of I sense the feeling of losing out on something important. What makes you say so is something very common. Probably I should look at another question.
Maybe a little more like what do you experience when I say that out loud?
Yeah, what do you experience
what are you hearing when I say that? Something like that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Shushma?
So I'm sensing a feeling of being overwhelmed. So when I say that, what is emerging for you?
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Smita?
Yeah, I see a starfish using all its legs to move at a time. What does this bring up for you?
You are a huge fan of metaphors, evidently.
Yeah, I am.
So I'm going to give you a challenge right now.
Sure.
What was a word that this client used that might help us to craft a metaphor? Anybody remember? Go ahead, Hamani. What did you remember?
All over.
Track.
All over
Yes.
the place.
Yes, and track. I need to get back on track. So, Smita, let's come up with a metaphor with that just for fun.
So one I already came up with, the starfish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it looks like somebody's lost in a jungle and figuring out which way to go.
Okay, that's a possibility. Or as Ramesh said earlier, that sort of fork in the road.
Yeah.
I'm visualizing someone being on the wrong lane. What does that bring up for you?
Yep. Yeah, that's a possibility.
So the visual I had first, Karen, was that there are too many folks like for the railway track, and the train is unable to decide which track to choose now. You know, there are too many of them, and that's the reason that starfish thing came to my mind.
So that could also be one of those train connections where they're going off in several different directions.
Right. Yeah.
Too many
Yeah.
tracks to choose from.
And yet, Shmita, what I want you to see in that one, not that the starfish idea was a bad thing, but if a client is giving us a bit of data, we want to try to use that data. So even your idea of that sounds as though there's a train that's come to multiple track choices. Yeah. Yeah. That makes, because you can also hear the potential overwhelm in that as well.
Yes. Yeah.
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 Okay, go ahead. Let's see.
Yeah, Carol, for me, what came up was there seems to be a lot of self-flagellation going on. What comes up for you when you hear me say that?
Yeah, that's true. Very possible. What else?
Shripad?
Trying to juggle 20 balls in the air.
Okay, I'm not sure I heard all that.
Am I audible?
Yeah, now you are now, yes.
Okay. Trying to juggle 20 balls in the air.
Yeah. Yeah, that could very well be too. Go ahead, Deepak.
I sense someone's trying to be perfect here. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. Or what about that might be true?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very true. Good. All right, let's do one that's a little bit longer.
Carol, it is 8 p.m. India time. Some of them may have to drop off, but we can continue. Not a problem. And I totally understand those who have other engagements and assignments and have to drop off. Feel free to drop off. We are recording the session just in case you need to catch up on what the next long example is going to be.
Would you like me to continue, Shanti?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Arun's got his, he's all ready. I can see his pencils ready and he's ready to go. All right. Now this one's a little bit longer, purposely, because I wanted you to make sure that you had the opportunity to listen to a client who's just going to keep on talking. And we want to make sure that we're not going to get stuck in this story. We're not going to try to remember words. We're going to try to think of this in the helicopter view. What is the total story here? Okay. So as you know, Monday, I go back to work from maternity leave. It's been approximately 2 or 3 weeks or so and some change since I was back at work. And as far as what's in my mind, what they think I kind of want to get clarity on is so I can continue to work on my mental fitness. Even in the past few months, I worked on just keeping accountability on myself and working how to trust myself in the process and being confident in what I can do in the midst of all the changes and stuff. So I think what's on my mind is just how to continue to keep that as in my mind as far as going forward.
Can I go?
You may.
Thank you. My observation would be, it seems like you've been paying great attention to your mental fitness and your health. And now you're feeling with your going back to work, it might be impacting the progress that you've already done. What makes you think so?
Okay, now the only thing we need to do with that, Raja, lovely, is that we have lots of yous in that observation.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, let's see if we can recraft it just for a minute and see what we can do about taking the yous out.
Okay.
And let's remember for all of us that the reason that we think about doing it that way is so that we're giving our client the opportunity to observe. We've got our client up in this helicopter looking at their whole situation. Okay, Smita, you have one in the meantime? Here we come, another metaphor, I'm sure of it.
No, this time no metaphor.
Okay.
Yeah. I sense a self-doubt and fear of change at work. What does this make you feel like?
Okay. The only thing I would take out of that, Smita, was the at work aspect of it.
Okay.
So that because again, remember that things like self-doubt are going to be pervasive throughout all of our lives. So I think I would just pull out the
At work.
the at work piece of it.
Okay.
It could be even right now as opposed to at work.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautifully done. Okay,
Thanks.
Rena?
So I would say I'm sensing that there is a lot of change happening. What are you thinking in terms of juggling through all of it?
Okay, so now what happened in that particular one, Renal, was actually moving into strategy.
Yeah,
We don't.
and probably also a little bit of diagnosis.
Yes, yes. So maybe let's take the initial observation and make sure that that is actually involving so that there's a lot of change happening that might feel a bit unsettling. Do you see how I'm actually now talking to the person of the client as opposed to just making a statement about things being unsettling?
Mm.
You see the difference?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you for that. Yosh?
Yeah, so it looks like somebody's starting on an unfamiliar marathon track with 100 kg on their shoulders.
Question?
Yeah, what does that bring up for you?
Yeah, great. That feels heavy right now. So yeah, that's very interesting. Deepak?
I had something similar. I'm hearing self-doubt. What are you feeling about it?
Okay, now let's soften that one. I'm hearing self-doubt. Let's see if we can soften that.
I'm noticing that someone might be going through self-doubt.
Yeah. Or even with what you said initially, I'm wondering if I'm hearing some self-doubt.
Yeah.
You hear the difference in that? That's literally all we're doing is not making a statement. We are making an observation. There's a great deal of difference between those. And that's where I want to encourage everyone to see that you need to make these observations for your client's well-being. But it's an observation. We are offering it as an observation. We are not making a statement that this is what it is, or this is what I'm seeing.
While we are at it, Carol, what I really wanted to say is this: when I heard intuitively, is this a pattern of self-doubt? When I heard your story, so could I say I am observing a pattern of self-doubt?
Let's soften it again.
I'm observing what seems to be like a pattern.
And very good. Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm observing what seems to be like a pattern of self-doubt.
Or
what do you feel about it?
Yes. Or I'm wondering if what I'm observing is a pattern of self-doubt. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just, and all you're doing there is you are bringing forth. I doubt very seriously, Deepak, if a client would come to you saying, well, I am for sure that this is self-doubt. So you are providing value to them in what you see. You just want to make sure that you are very kind at the way you deliver it. So we want to make sure that we're not saying I'm seeing, I'm observing, this is how it is. It is, this is a possibility. What happens when I bring that to you? Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's Neetha. Absolutely. Thanks for working with me on that one. Neetha, I think you have one.
It's not it's not an observation or something, just a question about patterns. The pattern is something that I see and I'm been struggling with, is that something you see over a period of time. So I'm not observing a pattern, right? If it's just one narration.
So that may be true. You're observing a pattern if, for example, your client describes us in their story doing either the perspective or doing something a certain way. And we do those kinds of things all through our lives a certain way. If you have a client that you have repeatedly, obviously pulling out a pattern would be a little easier to do. But it's not uncommon for us to observe patterns in a client in a first meeting.
Somebody needs to be on mute. Let me check. Monash, probably. Okay.
Did that help, Neetha?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
And one of the dangers that we have frequently as coaches is that we have a tendency to treat ongoing relationships with almost a desensitized mindset when we come in, because we've seen somebody 4, 5, 6 times. We have to remember that every single time we get together with a client, it is a unique setting. They are not the same. You are not the same. I jokingly say I've slept since then, which means you're not bringing the same person every time you come. And what you may see, let's say, for example, in our little Zoom square here, there's a whole lot going on outside of this Zoom square that we as coaches don't know. So we must assume that every time we're with a client, it's unique. That will help you be respectfully skeptical every time they say something. Now, having said that, and you have an ongoing relationship with a client, it is perfectly acceptable and actually necessary for us as coaches to bring back in something they might have said a few weeks ago and ask them, what's the connection now? Or I'm noticing that this pattern is continuing to happen session after session. Those kinds of things can also, they can both be true at the same time.
Thank you.
So let me open it up to any kinds of questions that people have about the entire topic. What kind of things came up for you? Raja?
Yeah. So one point that I would love to share as well is that sometimes we're projecting our own fears, anxiety, thoughts to the client. It might not necessarily be the situation or what they're thinking of at that moment.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I guess I forgot my question, but I'm happy I shared at least. Thank you.
So Raja, I'm going to jump off on that for just a minute, and that's where I recommend that we pause. In the classes that I teach, I often say this is the blessed pause. The reason is because it provides your client time to think, process what they've just said out loud. It provides you as a coach time to think and listen carefully. One cannot pause too much.
Yes.
Which is going to feel a little counterintuitive sometimes when we feel like we really just need to get in there and ask that question.
Yeah.
Never the case.
I remembered my question.
Okay.
So it's basically like, even sometimes when you're trying to deliver the observation in a softly manner and you're considerate, you might trigger something in the client and they might start becoming defensive or a bit aggressive. So how do you tackle such a situation?
That's certainly a possibility. But what I would do to tackle that situation might be what just happened for you. I noticed, maybe something like, I noticed that triggered something. What happened for you in that space?
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if they're
Thank you.
on it, then you just move on. It's perfectly fine. But again, that's the idea of not being attached to the outcome of the question you want. When we are attached, we often hide what it is we want to say, as opposed to bringing it out there in the open. And make no mistake, coaches, when you hide what you're going to say, it's going to leak out somewhere else. It'll leak out in innuendo in your questions. As my mother used to say to me, when you sweep things under the rug, all you have is a lumpy rug. So
yeah.
Happened for us as coaches is the questions will be laced with something that we didn't say. And inadvertently, we don't realize that we are actually sort of putting those thoughts in there. Shushma, you wanted to ask something.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a fantastic session and so many deep insights which you got to really internalize and digest. But I just wanted to share with you when you were talking about what beliefs do I hold, which comes up. And just recently, I was stuck in a client conversation where the client, after every 3 sentences, would start crying, and that was a pattern. And my very strong belief at that point is, if you keep crying like this in the corporate, obviously you're not going to be respected. How are you showing up, with others? And because of my strong belief, I was not able to, I think, coach her well. But today I've learned. So thank you so much. I should have actually just expressed it and says, when I'm noticing this happening, so how are you sensing it? And I would be better next time. Thank you so much.
That is an excellent thought, because what happened for you there was that your own belief and perspective got in the way.
Yes.
It does. I mean, again, we're human. Remember, we all have that conveyor belt going on in us as well. And that conveyor belt is our bias. And we all have biases. They're hidden. But what we want to make sure that we are is openly respectful for our clients. And if you notice something that a client might be doing, I mean, something like that might be, I'm noticing this is a very emotional topic for you, or there seems to be a great deal of emotion leaking out. What is happening for you in that spot? And then at some point down in the conversation, it might be, what's valuable for you about having that happen? And then you could ask, what might not be valuable for you in that? That gives the client the opportunity to look and think it through, as opposed to being laced with your bias that, hey, this is not going to work in an executive setting. Making sense?
Absolutely fantastic. What's valuable, what's not valuable. I'm noting it down. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I had a client years ago, a therapist who had an eating disorder and had been given advice by her therapist about certain mindsets associated with the eating disorder. Years later, when she was my client, she still had that mindset going on. And when I asked her at one spot on a completely separate topic, I said to her, what about that is valuable for you? And the light went right on, and she said, I never realized that I was continuing to follow a specific pattern that worked for me 10 years ago, but it doesn't work fully for me now. I'm going to adopt this, and I will. And what happens is, if we work so hard at helping a client or pushing a client to see a certain perspective, as opposed to just asking them, there's a reason that it helps you, because you're not letting it go. Something about it is working. Let them tell you what that is, or discover for themselves what's working. But I do also want to encourage you all as coaches, please don't think that your goal is for every coaching session to end lovely. It's not necessarily going to. 9 times out of 10, all of us as human beings continue to think. And a lot of what transforms us happens outside of the coaching space. That does not mean that you are failures. What it does mean is that you've evoked new awareness, and your job is to partner with someone else to evoke new awareness. It's that in a nutshell. Partner with someone to evoke new awareness. And so the last thing I want you to think about too is that all of your questions need to have a partnering feel to them. Do not inadvertently raise yourself up to a place where you're an expert. Make sure that you are partnering with your client, even how your questions are asked. What do you think? What do you see? What do you hear? What are you experiencing? So I will certainly offer to everyone that I'd be happy to come do some more practice sessions if anybody would like to do that. But I will leave that up to Shanti and team to decide.
Looking at all the excitement in the chat, Carol, I'm going to come back to you. The chapter is definitely left hungry for more. Sincere thanks for your time, your poise, the finesse with which you helped us soften our challenges is simply amazing. We definitely need more practice, and I'll grab the opportunity and reach out to you again to make this happen again.
I've been honored to be with all of you, so thank you so very much for being part of this.
Lovely. You have a great evening, Carol.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol.
Thanks
so much, Carol. It's been fantastic session.
Yeah, amazing.
Amazing. Deep, 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 and deep insights at a very granular level.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Carol.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Carol. It's actually, for me, there's been a shift, and thank you so much for that.
Marvelous.
Yeah,
I'm so glad.
thank you.
I look forward to hearing more about it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great morning, noon, evening, and
Bye,
see you in the
Carol.
next session.
Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing you
Thank you.
again.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.